All right. Now, traditionally in our catechism classes, we usually say, what happens in Holy Communion? Well, there are three different ways of thinking about this among Christians. And so I'm going to give you the standard catechism account, and then we're going to go a little deeper with this thing. You'll get something like this. You have bread and you have wine. And there are those Christians who say, and that's all you have. Because they believe that the bread and the wine are only symbols and that they simply represent the body and blood of Christ, and they remind us of the sacrifice of Christ, and that the meal helps us remember what Jesus did for us, but that's all it is. Are you getting Christ's body and blood? Heaven forbid. Of course not, because that makes no sense, and it's kind of repugnant, and no, you don't. And that, of course, is the teaching of the Reformed. Now, there are varieties and stripes of this. You can have a really radical, kind of like a Zwinglian view. And Zwingli, remember, was one of those reformers about the time of Luther, Ulrich Zwingli. And he went so far as to say, it's nothing but a symbol, and that's it. Christ isn't even close to this thing. It's a symbol, period. And so he went really far off in this. Calvin backed off of that a little bit and said, Christ is present in a spiritual way. And Calvin had his reasons for that, and his reasons were Christological, because he didn't believe that the body was everywhere that Jesus was. We'll talk about that more in a minute. So, is it just bread and wine? Well, the Reformed say so. Then we have the view of the Roman Catholics. And the Roman Catholics teach something else quite a bit different. They say it's the body and blood of Christ. And that's all it is. Because for them, they believe in the thing known as, yes, transubstantiation. Transubstantiation. What a great word. Okay? Right up there with ipsum verba, even though transubstantiation is an English word now. So you got to know transubstantiation. Transubstantiation is an interesting concept. And what they believe is that when the priest says the words of institution, the ipsum verba, the very body and the bread and wine are changed into the body and blood of Christ. Now, they're not silly enough to say that now suddenly you see this cup filled with wine and it now looks like blood and tastes like blood. They're not saying that. But what they are saying is that it really does change. And what they're doing to explain this is they're going to a bit of Greek philosophy. And we have to delve into this just a minute so you can appreciate what transubstantiation is all about and what they're trying to do here. In Greek philosophy, the philosophers will make a distinction between the thing that really is and its accidents. So, for example, you're sitting in a chair. And your chair happens to be one that swivels and has wheels and is really quite nice, very fancy chair. In the back of the room are other chairs, old hard plastic ones with steel legs that don't move. Which one's a chair? Well, they both are. And you know that because the Greeks would say, because they both participate in chairness. All right? This kind of comes out of Greek Platonic philosophy, where you have this ideal realm. Somewhere out there is the realm where the ideal chair exists. And every chair in this world participates in chairness. That's why you know it's a chair. All right? So, what they would say then is that the substance of this thing is chair. That's the substance. And that always is there. The accidents might change. I might slop some paint on it, change its color. I might, make it so it doesn't swivel anymore. Or I might, cut the wheels off. Is it still chair? Yes, because it still has the substance of chair, even though the accidents have changed. Now, let's apply this one other example. People. All human beings are human beings because they have the substance or the essence of humanity inside them. And every one of us in the room is human. We all know that. And yet, we all look very different. Facial hair, no facial hair, lots of hair, not much hair, black, white, green, orange, whatever, tall, short, male, female, all these different accidents. But yet we're still human, even though the accidents change. So, here's what Roman Catholics did thinking about this whole thing. They said, this is perfect. This is what we need to explain what's going on in the sacrament. Because they say what happens in the sacrament is that the bread and the wine are there on the altar with the substance of bread and wine and the accidents of bread and wine. But then when the priest says the words of institution, the substance of bread goes out and the substance of Christ's body comes in. But the accidents remain the same. And so that's why it's called transubstantiation, because you're changing the substance. Trans, of course, means change, transfer. So you're changing the substance. Transubstantiation. In the Lutheran view, we'll come back to that in a minute. In the Lutheran view, the traditional way, the pastor would tell you, now, Reformed are dumb and the Catholics don't have it quite right because we know that you get all four. And then the pastor says, that's the difference between us and everybody else. And all the kids and all the adults in the instruction class go, oh, so the only difference between me and the Reformed is I get the body and blood and they don't. That's the only difference? Well, I don't think that's a big deal. And the only difference between me and the Catholics is they say it's really the body and blood, and we say it's body and blood and bread and wine. What's the big deal? And this is a totally inadequate explanation of what the differences are and of our position. So that's why we can't be content with this. Transubstantiation is an attractive way to try to explain this, but that's exactly the problem with it. It's trying to explain it. Because the fact of the matter is, what we confess and what we believe is that when you receive the bread and the wine, you're getting bread and wine, but along with that bread and wine, you are getting the true body and blood of Christ. That's what's happening. How can that be? I don't know. Nobody does. It is a profound mystery. And Luther described it in the Small Catechism. He said that in, with, and under the bread and the wine is the body and blood of Christ. What does in, with, and under mean? Who knows? He's just stringing together a bunch of prepositions because he doesn't know what's going on either. He just knows that somehow in, with, and under what? In, what do you mean in? With, somehow, with the bread and with the wine, you are really receiving the body and blood of Christ. How? Don't know. It is the mystery. That's why it's a sacrament. And so we talk about the sacramental mystery of the presence of Christ. And why do we know that Christ is there? Exactly. It all hinges on the promise of Christ. Jesus said, this is my body, this is my blood, because he said it, it's so. Do I have to know how? No. Don't need to know how. I just take him at his word. And that's the big problem. So the problem with transubstantiation is you're trying to explain it. We're not interested in trying to explain it. Sometimes people say Lutherans don't believe in transubstantiation. They believe in consubstantiation, which means that with the bread and the wine, you're getting body and blood, because con means with. But even that is not a good way to speak about this, because, again, you're trying to explain. We can't explain. We're not interested in philosophical explanations for while the substances are together. No. You just simply have the bread and the wine and the body and the blood. All of them are there for you. Carla. Consubstantiation. Some people say that's what Lutherans believe, and some Lutherans are even willing to accept that, and I don't think that we should be doing that, because we don't need to try to give philosophical explanations. We simply take Christ at his word. He says it, we believe it. That's the end of it.
So that's the error of the Catholics, is they try to explain it too.
That's part of their error, and it's the smallest of their error. There's a much bigger one, but we haven't got there yet. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, because their translation of it or whatever would be like they're literally re-sacrificing Christ each time.
That's the biggest issue. So the transubstantiation, that's maybe 10% of the problem. 90% of the problem with Roman Catholic teaching is the sacrifice of the Mass. This is why we don't agree with Rome and how they practice the sacrament. We are really happy that they teach us the body and blood. That's good. But they go further and they talk about the sacrifice of the Mass. The sacrifice of the Mass, or they'll sometimes call it the unbloody sacrifice. The unbloody sacrifice. What they teach is that when the priest is at the altar and he is saying the words of institution, he is actually, by his actions, re-sacrificing Christ. And by that action of re-sacrificing, earning forgiveness for all those present.
So the first time wasn't good enough.
Exactly. That's the big problem. So Christ's death was not adequate. Well, it was great, but see, we're doing it again here, and it's happening now. And see, all kinds of things start to snap into place when you understand this. Why is it that Catholic believes he's just got to be at Mass? He doesn't have to pay attention. He doesn't have to listen to the sermon. He doesn't care if he gets anything else sermon or not, but he was at Mass and he got the sacrament. Why? Because by being at Mass and participating and receiving the bread, he has now shared in that forgiveness, and he's got another dose of forgiveness to get him through another week. He's got a little grace, and it's been warned. And this also explains why the Roman Catholics can have something like Masses for the dead. Because I can be a priest and I can be standing in an empty cathedral or an empty church and I can be saying Mass and giving the bread and the wine to myself because there's no one else there, and I can be aiming by my prayers all the forgiveness I'm earning by this unbloody sacrifice for the sake of some dead person. Help get them out of purgatory. Sacrifices for the dead. Masses for the dead. You hear about it all the time. Mass for the dead, a funeral Mass. We're having the Mass for the sake of the dead person, so all that forgiveness that is being earned is going for that dead person to his account. It all starts to click into place. It makes great sense if that's how you understand it. And the big problem, of course, is that they are earning forgiveness by their participation. And that's not right. We would teach you're getting forgiveness simply because Christ is giving it. The grace is there for you, and he's delivering it to you, into your very mouth. So, sacrifice of the Mass is the big problem we have with Rome's teaching. And that's an issue. Now, transubstantiation and the sacrifice of the Mass, this is just the interesting stuff, so it's worth delving into, also explains some of the odd behavior in Roman Catholic tradition that we hear about. Like, for example, communion in one kind, which means only the bread and not the wine. Now, that's how Catholics used to do it for a long time. Some of them are starting to change slowly.
They still do that, though.
Many of them do. Some of them are practicing communion in two kinds, but the traditionalists, only the bread. So, when you go up to the Catholic altar, you get the bread and no wine. The priest drinks all the wine, which is why you get all the old jokes about the alcoholic priest. And there's some legitimacy to that. So the priest would drink the wine for everybody, the people would only get bread. Why? It's very simple. If this has become the true body and blood of Christ, that means I'm actually holding the body of Christ in my hand and putting it in their mouth. And if they drop it, yikes, quick, pick it up. You don't want any crumbs to hit the ground. That's why they have the little altar boy running around, holding that little plate and sticking underneath the chin of the people receiving the sacrament. He's trying to catch any crumbs. This is Christ's body. You don't want Christ's body falling to the floor and people walking on it. That would be disrespectful. So you have the little guy with the plate. And why not give them the wine? What happens if some stupid parishioner spills some wine? Picking up a crumb is one thing. Christ's blood soaking into the carpet, that's a bigger problem. What are you going to do now? And so, see, they believed in the transubstantiation idea, and so that's why you don't give them the bread, the wine, and the blood. And then they justified it this way, because they would say that, obviously, wherever Christ's body is, there's always some blood in the body. And so if you get the body, you're getting some blood too, and so that's enough. That's how they legitimized it.
So what happens if the priest is sick and 5 minutes after Mass he goes back in the back and purges himself? Vomits.
There you go.
There goes the
No.
blood of Christ, huh?
I suppose.
Top of the toilet.
Yeah. So, that explains a lot of stuff. This also explains why in the Mass in the Latin Church, before they started using it in the vernacular, in other words, in the common people after Vatican II in the 60s, before this it was all Latin Mass, they would have the smells and the bells. Well, the smells is incense, but the bells, what's with the bells ringing? Yeah, some of you don't know anything about this if you don't have Catholic, but if you have. What's that? Yeah, that's why the bell's ringing. The bells ring because the people who are hearing Mass wouldn't know what was going on because they don't know Latin. And so they would have to have little cues every once in a while to let people know what's happening. So when the priest would say, "This is my body," the bell would ring and everybody goes, "Oh, the magic just happened. Okay, it's time to genuflect." That's why they did it. It was the little cues. It's like Pavlov's dog. Ding-a-ling, everybody bow. It just happened. And then when he goes further in the Mass and he says, "This is my blood," ding-a-ling-a-ling, everybody bows again. That's why he does it. And one more piece of trivia for you. In the Latin Mass, when the priest would be saying Mass, he would say, "Hoc est corpus meum." This is my body. And at that point, the bell would ring. Hoc est corpus, hocus pocus. That's where the magic words come from. The magic words hocus pocus come straight out of the Latin Mass.
That's not good.
Yeah.
A lady that joined our church said that she was Catholic and she went to a communion one time. She hadn't been to communion quite a long time, and it was a common cup. They did allow wine to be given to them, but she noticed things floating in it. And she had forgotten that the priest put something in the wine beforehand, and she thought people had spit into it or something. And what is that?
I don't know what they would put into the wine. I know that in a lot of Catholic churches, they will cut the wine and they'll mix it with water. They have water on the altar and they'll
She
mix
said there
it.
were things floating in it. And she said-
I suspect they probably weren't supposed to be there.
Well, she said they were supposed to be there, and I don't
Okay.
know what they were.
I don't
That's
know.
why I was asking.
I'm not familiar with that. I don't know. Yeah.
Could be sometimes because of the method of distribution, because sometimes, you talk about intinction. where they dip
Intinction
the-
is where you take the host and you dip it in the wine. Maybe someone had practiced intinction and some of the hosts had broken off. That's
Yeah,
possible.
maybe that's what it was.
That's very possible.
Maybe some of the hosts were supposed to be
Yeah.
sprinkled in there or something.
Yeah, and see, in Eastern Orthodoxy, they always practice intinction. Intinction is the name for dipping the host and then taking it. And I've seen people practice that too, and we'll talk about that if you want to. John?
At home at our church, in the sacristy, there's the regular sink for washing the dishes and stuff,
And
and
then
it
there's-
goes into the
uh-huh.
septic tank.
And then there's a
there's
piscina.
one that dumps outside.
Mhm.
And when you deal with like cleaning everything
That's right.
and the
You use the
wine,
piscina.
we throw any leftover like broken wafers out on the ground for the birds to eat.
Mhm.
But it never goes in the garbage. It never
That's
goes
right.
in the septic tank.
That's right. You return it to the earth. That's right. Because we don't think it is turned into the bread and wine, body and blood, but we also believe that this is special, it's been set aside, it's sacramental now, and it's been consecrated, so it's been set aside for special use, so we don't treat it like ordinary, normal stuff. We don't just dump it down the drain or throw it away. And so the right thing to do with the leftover elements is either consume them or return them to the earth.
Okay, so it's just dedicating the holy things to specifically
That's
holy
right.
purposes.
Recognizing these have been set aside for a special use, and we're going to treat them in a special way. And so that's why, a good sacristy will have what they call a piscina, which is a sink that vents right to the earth, into the foundation. I remember in one church they had a piscina, but some plumber came along and said, "What's going on here? The guy didn't finish this. It's just going into the ground." So he put a trap in and ran into the sewer. That was pretty funny because he didn't know what was happening. Yeah.
All right. I had my fieldwork pastor this past year, had this view that when we eat and drink the elements, after we consume them, they actually become body and blood inside our bodies.
They are body and blood. It's not becoming, it's body and blood when you receive it. And so this is one of the kind of old debates too. So this is our position. We got to come back and hit the Reformed here in a minute. We're not done with them. But